Good afternoon. We are coming out of our lunch break. For those of you who have come this afternoon, we welcome you to the State Board of Health. Thank you for being here. Our first item on the agenda for the afternoon is a public hearing on immunization of child care and school children against certain vaccine-preventable diseases. And Dr. Ortiz will lead this off.
Yes, this afternoon we are going to talk about updating our use of the immunization list for students that are attending schools and child care. And in...
What did you put closer?
Oh, speak more clearly. In essence, providers
outside of the mouth.
Providers who give immunizations for students for entry into daycare or to the public schools follow the recommendations that come out every year from the Advisory Council on Immunization Practices, which is referenced as ACIP in a number of our documents. And we use the most current recommendations, but what we're going to talk about today is actually updating the recommendations from the board and to come in line with the most current immunization recommendations. So to fill us in a little bit more on that, we have Tara Wolf and also Jana Barty, who will give us some more information. And when we're finished with this, we do have the option of approving an amendment to revise the WAC that would make that happen.
Right. So just to add one or two more words to what Dr. Ortiz has said, this rule sets the requirements for the doses and the intervals that kids are immunized by before they attend school or daycare centers. So, as she said, physicians or medical people are already using the 2012 ACIP recommendations. However, our rule has an old reference. It's 2010, and so we need to move up to the more current practice, which is based on the best science available. So I just will take you through what you have in your packet very quickly. As Dr. Ortiz said, you do have a motion in front of you today, and we will also have a chance for a public hearing. And it's my understanding that there are some people here who do wish to testify. So we will have an opportunity for that a little bit later. But in terms of your packets, again, we have put a copy of the PowerPoint in there for you because some of you aren't sitting in ideal spots to see the screen. The PowerPoint is in blue. As always, when we put a rule out, we have a comment period, and we have received comments on this rule. The Department of Health summarized those comments for you, and they are in the pink sheet in your packets. Dr. Ortiz referenced the 2012 ACIP schedule. We made a copy of that, and Desiree was kind enough to copy it in color for us because it's much easier to read that way. So that is in your packets too. And finally, not last but not least, we've included the rule language. So you can see the actual change to the rule that we plan to make where we update to the 2012 ACIP schedule. And as usual, it's with great pleasure that we have Jana Barty here.
Good afternoon. Just a quick refresher. If you'll recall, in March, you voted to adjust the implementation plan for TDAP vaccination requirements for 6th graders so that that implementation plan would reflect the most current immunization recommendations from the National Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, which are encompassed in the 2012 ACIP recommendations. You did this as a way to sort of reconcile an issue we had with our pertussis situation, as well as our out of alignment effect of referencing the 2010 schedule when there were more current recommendations available from the national body. So today, as you vote on taking the final step in action to update the WAC so that it references the 2012 ACIP schedule, it sort of completes, in my mind, the administrative process for making sure that the school requirements reflect the most current medical best practice. And I did share this slide with you in March, and I wanted to share it again just so that we're all crystal clear on the 2010 recommendations for TDAP vaccination as compared to the 2012 recommendations, and that is the only difference in regard to the recommendations related to Washington State school requirements. So for the routine recommendation of vaccination at 11 to 12 years of age, there's no change, and the way we implement that in Washington State is to make it a 6th grade school entry requirement. There is a change in interval. In the 2010 schedule, there was a 5-year interval since the last DTAP or TD vaccination. And in 2011, picked up in the 2012 schedule, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices changed that recommendation so that TDAP vaccination should be administered regardless of interval. The other change is related to under-vaccinated children who are between 7 and 10 years of age. It used to be recommended that they just receive a tetanus diphtheria vaccination, and now it's recommended that they receive the tetanus diphtheria pertussis vaccination. Again, those are the only changes between the 2010 schedule and the 2012 schedule, and it has been said by Dr. Ortiz and Tara, our healthcare providers are already practicing using the 2012 schedule, so it brings together both the medical best practice and what we're asking schools to check for as children are entered. So, in short, providers should not delay TDAP, give it sooner to unvaccinated children if needed. This was a part of the more recent changes related to the elevated levels of pertussis that have been experienced in the nation, most specifically California. No additional TDAP doses are recommended. You're one and done. If a child received the recommendation for TDAP at 11 to 12, they're done. If they happen to be one of those kids between 7 and 10 who was under-vaccinated with the DTAP vaccine, and they received the TDAP vaccine per the last slide I showed you, that'd be all they needed as well. They wouldn't be recommended to get an additional dose at 11 to 12. And the reasons for this are just additional data available, more experience with disease outbreaks in the nation, and more understanding about what's going on with both the disease and our vaccines that we have to protect people against the disease, and our ability to understand how better to protect those who are unimmunized against pertussis or under-immunized against pertussis. That's what I have in terms of the presentation to support taking the final steps in amending the Washington Administrative Code to reference the 2012 schedule. As Tara mentioned, we did receive some comments, and they are on your pink sheet in your folder. I'd be glad to address any of the comments or responses that we provided to the questions, but what we did here is try to categorize them in terms of the type or the topic being suggested. You'll see up at the top that we had a total of 12 people who submitted comments, but then there were some comments that had multiple topics in them. So we've tried to explain that in this graph. Hopefully it does a good job. The first set of comments was related to mandatory vaccination, and we just wanted to remind folks that although there have been some changes in Washington's exemption law, there are still allowances for exemptions. Immunizations are required to protect children in the congregate setting of schools to try to reduce and eliminate the chance of vaccine-preventable diseases in that setting, but there are exemptions available. The second set of comments is with regard to the effectiveness of the pertussis vaccine, and although we are seeing some waning immunity with this vaccine, it doesn't last as long as we would like. It's still a very effective disease, and it's still the best protection against this disease. There were some comments about the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, and that is a federal program, and it's really out of scope with the State Board of Health requirements. And then on the back side of your sheet, you have a few comments related to vaccine safety. And as we state in our response, we respect the decision-making responsibility of each parent with regard to vaccinating their children, and still the best science indicates that protection from vaccine-preventable diseases through immunization is the best medical practice. That's what I have. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Questions from the board? Now we've had some of this presentation before. Okay. If there are no further questions, we do have at this time public comment or public testimony. And I will call people who have signed up first. Janelle Hall. Janelle, would you like to come up?
Good afternoon, Board Chair and Board members. Thank you for hearing my testimony today. My name is Janelle Hall. I'm the Washington State Advocacy Director for the National Vaccine Information Center, as well as the Washington State Coordinator for Talk About Curing Autism. I'm here today to advocate against additional vaccines to the Washington State childhood vaccine schedule. My husband and I had a normally developing, bright and precocious young son who I took to all his well-child visits right on time. I had discussions about vaccines with my pediatrician, but when he assured me that all the vaccines he was administering were safe and that I was doing the right thing, I proceeded with the vaccine schedule as he instructed me to do. Soon we began seeing changes in our son, and by the age of 3 it was clear he had significant vaccine damage. How could this be? I had delivered a beautiful, healthy child and had done all the right things, or so I thought. What I didn't realize about the recommended vaccine schedule is the vaccines within it had no independent third-party safety tests to validate the statements my son's pediatrician was telling me. Nor did I realize that many of the vaccines contain known neurotoxins and live viruses to wreak havoc on my young son's immature immune system. I also learned later that a vaccine is a huge immune event for a body's system, especially when they are given in multiples and especially when they're given to a tiny baby whose immune system has not yet matured. My son received his Hep B at 14 minutes old. Coming from a family tree wrought with autoimmune disorders, my son didn't have a chance. But per the standard pediatric protocol, my son's family history was not taken into consideration when his pediatrician instructed us to vaccinate him with more than 30 vaccines by the age of 3. Our standard well-child visit consisted of a brief 10-minute check by his pediatrician, followed by 10 minutes of vaccine administration and CD informational pages handed to us on the way out the door. My son is living proof that one size does not fit all, and that the aggressive vaccine schedule of today is too much for many of our young children's bodies. The current policy of state-mandated vaccines in compliance with a one-size-fits-all vaccine schedule is a public health threat to a significant number of today's children. Today, 1 in 6 children have a learning disability. 1 in 9 children have asthma. 1 in 12 children have food allergies. Today, 1 in 450 children have diabetes. Since 1988, our government has spent $2 billion to pay off families whose children have been killed or maimed by vaccines. Our vaccine rate keeps rising, but our children just keep getting sicker. What is needed in Washington State is a strict policy of informed consent among patients and parents of patients, not more vaccines in a mandated schedule. Because if there were truly informed consent among patients and parents of patients, then well-intentioned and educated parents like myself would not be able to vaccinate our children without knowing the ingredients in the vaccines that were being injected into our children's bodies. We wouldn't learn long after our children have been injured by vaccines that safety tests relied on by our doctors are not funded by independent third parties, but rather by the vaccine industry itself. and that the members of the government's regulatory bodies have a large number of financial ties to the vaccine industry and have a vested interest in the continuation of a strong national vaccine policy furthered by state mandates. Now here in Washington, with the passage of last year's new requirement to get a healthcare practitioner's signature to claim a religious or philosophical exemption, the stakes have gone up. It's getting harder to find doctors willing to sign these exemption forms for fear of backlash because of the ever-present pressure from Big Pharma and its lobbyists, pressure within the medical industry, within our medical boards and bodies, and within our legislation. Board of Health members, I urge you to consider children in this state on an individual basis and to stop mandating vaccines in this blanket fashion. As Board of Health members, you've been tasked with the obligation to look after all of the state of Washington citizens, not just those who are funded by pharmaceutical companies and whose opinions align with the status quo. I urge you to consider all of Washington citizens, including those who have a predisposition to be harmed by vaccines. Today, 1 in 6 children have a learning disability, and today our society is the most vaccinated it has ever been. Please seriously consider this statistic and these many Washington citizens.
Thank you, Janelle.
Thank you.
Next we have Audrey Adams.
I fully recognize that every single member of this board wishes to do the best by our children and the citizens of this state. However, some of us disagree with the method of how to go about best protecting. I've spent a good part of the last quarter of a century studying the issue of vaccinations, not immunization, because they're two different things, myself, and I fully believe that the best way to protect our kids is to protect their immune systems. And my research has not shown enough evidence, and certainly not best scientific practices, to demonstrate that the addition of more and more vaccines will accomplish what we all want, and that is healthy children. It appears that perhaps the reverse is happening because, you know, when I was growing up, every kid could eat peanuts. You sure didn't have to worry about somebody across the room eating a cookie with a bit of peanuts in it, and then suddenly they go into anaphylactic shock. I didn't have any kids with neurological disorders in my entire school that I was aware of. It's a different world today. Something is very seriously happening to our kids. Now, is it all vaccines? Probably not. But do we know for sure that when we add vaccine after vaccine after vaccine after vaccine, do we know for sure that this is the most safe practice, especially if we have not seen the studies from the national level comparing completely unvaccinated children with fully vaccinated children? And those studies still have not been done. They've been asked repeatedly, but they still aren't here. So you don't know. I mean, probably all of you probably have are many times more degreed than I am. But you know that a good scientific review looks for a pure control. We don't have one. We don't have a pure control. I think we need to stop adding to the list. When the United States infant mortality rate is, I've seen a couple different numbers, but basically somewhere like 42 or 43 out of 43 countries in the world, and we're also the highest vaccinated. Something is amiss. If we're the highest vaccinated country in the world, shouldn't our vaccination rates be somewhere, our mortality rate, we should be number 1, number 2, at least in the top 10, but we're not.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the topic of the immunization?
I am Ann Clifton with Mercury Awareness Team of Washington, and I've testified to you many times. And of course, you did get my testimony related to the fact that the pertussis vaccine is not working effectively. And so it's really not helpful to add more because of the fact that the B. pertussis mutated 20 years ago and the vaccine was never changed, and they don't usually check for B. parapertussis. And the fact that the vaccine court has awarded 25 or 75% of the injury and death money for pertussis-related injuries and deaths. So it's a very dangerous vaccine and should not be increased. And of course, Bill Osmondson found when he was on the school board in Bonner County, Idaho, when they had a school lockdown for pertussis epidemic, that the ones who got it were fully vaccinated and the unvaccinated did not. I think a lot of it relates to the fact you need a strong immune system. And vaccines, particularly for children under 2, are a heavy attack on the immune system. Now, Desiree, I think, passed out my information, didn't you, Desiree?
Oh, I have another handout here as well.
Oh, okay. Anyway, I was just going to really quickly go through vaccine ingredients. MSG, antifreeze, formaldehyde, aluminum, glycerin, lead, cadmium, sulfates, yeast, proteins, antibiotics, acetone, neomycin, streptomycin, mercury, monkey kidney, dog kidney, chicken embryo, chicken egg, duck egg, calf serum, aborted fetal tissue, pig blood, horse blood, sheep blood, rabbit brain, guinea pig, cow heart, animal viruses, etc.
1 minute.
1 minute left? Okay, good enough. She's still keeping track of all issues. Anyway, we have gone from when I was young, when we didn't know anything about autism, and when I had the childhood diseases, so I had lifetime immunity, we went, at that time when I was young, we were 3rd best in the world for birth to 1 infant mortality. Now we're 46th the worst, according to the figure I saw. And so we're going the absolute wrong direction. We're not looking at the family history. Do they produce metallothionein? Can they get heavy metals out? Shouldn't certainly give any vaccines with mercury in them until at least 6 months of age, because they can't get mercury out. And then what the vaccine does is it bypasses the natural immune system, which diseases come in airborne, and it prevents them from forming a strong cellular immune system. I think I'm going to close on that because you have my written testimony already. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to testify on item number 8, which is the immunization question? I see someone approaching.
So please just state and spell your name for the record.
Okay. My name is Emma Dixon, EMMA DIXON. And to be honest, I wasn't prepared to address the board today, but I'm prompted to make some comments, particularly given that the changes recommended are largely centered around the TDAP vaccine and the current pertussis issue in the state. And it's something that I've been evaluating in my family. And I have to say there is quite a disconnect between the recommendations that are published by the Board of Health and the actual data that's provided. One thing that was apparent to me as I was discussing this with a pediatrician was looking at the data from previous years' outbreaks. There's a trend that the cases increase around August and September. And I asked, well, why is that? It almost seems like it's related to the vaccine, because August, September, that's a time when kids are being prompted to come in for their immunizations in order to go back to school. Anyway, I didn't really get a good answer for that. But in doing further research myself, I found online that the vaccine, although it addresses the B. pertussis strain apparently quite effectively, it does not address the B. parapertussis strain at all. And in fact, there's been studies that indicate that it actually promotes the colonization. And so to me, that seems to indicate, well, yeah, there could be a compelling link then between additional immunizations around this time and increased cases. And I think that trend would also follow in this outbreak, that if more people are being prompted to vaccinate, we're seeing more cases. And another area where I see a disconnect is, I think we were just told a few minutes ago that this is the best protection for this disease. But if you look at the incidence by age group,
the vast, overwhelming majority are in the childhood range, the 1 to 18, which are, by the state's own awareness, 60 to 80% vaccinated. Yet the adult population, we know, is largely unvaccinated, and we see very few cases in those age ranges. So I'm communicating that as a member of the community, I'm seeing a big disconnect between the recommendations on a national level from the medical community and, consequently, the State Board of Health and the actual data of what's occurring. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Is there someone else who would like to testify on the vaccination question? Okay, at that point I'll close the public hearing. Members of the board have questions they'd like to address to our staff? Okay. There is an opportunity, if you so choose, to approve an amendment to revise WAC 246-105-040.
Mr. Chair, I move to that the board approves the amendments to revise WAC 246-105-040 as published in WSR 12-10-011 and asks that a CR 103 be filed to adopt the amendments.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded that the board approve the aforesaid motion. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? It's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, staff.